Awesome. All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our presentation on Nature for New Minnesotans. So I will start us off with just a quick introduction of the facilitators. My name is Lucas. I'm a PhD student at the University of Minnesota and the program coordinator for Nature for New Minnesotans. And I guess, Britt, would you like to go next?
Sure thing. Britt Forsberg with University of Minnesota Extension. I sort of dreamed this project up in collaboration with other people to have a job for myself, and then found something not grant funded, and we've hired Lucas, and it's been fabulous.
Thank you.
And I'm Jessica Jones. I am an ESL and ABE teacher in St. Paul, working with Literacy Minnesota, and we've had a great time as a partner on this project.
Awesome. Okay, so just a quick look at where we're going. We're going to start off with a sort of chat or discussion about why science learning in ESL classrooms can be challenging. And then I'll speak a bit about some of the literature about accessing the outdoors and the benefits to accessing the outdoors and some of those barriers to BIPOC communities and as well as ESL communities. And then we're going to actually give you an overview of Nature for New Minnesotans, what this program is, how it addresses these barriers to outdoor access. And then last but not least, we will hear from Jessica primarily. She's going to talk about the pilot that we ran this past spring in her classroom and how we taught Minnesota natural history in an ESL classroom. So that is kind of the roadmap for today. If you have any questions at any time, please feel free to put them in the chat. We have some people monitoring that, and we're hoping to have time at the end for some questions as well. So, all right, I will turn it over to Jessica.
All right. Those of you who have peeked inside of a GED book recently know that, especially when you get to GED science, the language gets technical really fast. But we have a lot of learners who either have limited reading skills or are learning about science concepts in a language that is not their first language. And so I'm going to read this passage out loud just to get us started. And as I do, you can start throwing some ideas in the chat about what makes this a complex text, particularly for English language learners. All right, I'll do my best with the pronunciation here. The seasons on Earth are caused by the tilt of the Earth as it rotates on its axis and revolves around the sun. The 23.5 degree tilt of the Earth's axis results in changes of the angle of incident sunlight. A common misconception is that the seasons are caused by the distance between the Earth and sun. In fact, summer in the Northern Hemisphere occurs at aphelion, the farthest distance between the Earth and sun, and follows summer solstice when incident sunlight is most concentrated along the Tropic of Cancer, 23 degrees, 26 minutes, 22 seconds. Okay, that's my, it's not quite David Attenborough, but that's my best. So I'm gonna just pull up the chat here. I see, yeah, words with multiple meanings, somebody mentioned. That is, that's a big one for a lot of this science stuff. So if we think about like a cell phone versus a nerve cell, a dinner plate versus plate tectonics. Even here we have the word degree, but it's not being used to talk about temperature. So those, we come up against those a lot. And then a lot of more technical vocabulary that might only appear in this content specific context. And then math, people are noticing right away, there's some math concepts that also have to integrate with the science. And yes, length of sentences, someone put in here. So these more complex sentences, academic all around, but this is where this is where some of our learners are headed or are already and struggling to get through these kinds of. All right, I think we can go on from there.
Awesome. Yeah, so thank you all for sort of sharing out in the chat. It is challenging. Science context can be challenging for everybody, but there are some of these unique challenges for ESL classrooms and ESL learners. So I wanted to quickly, and I do emphasize quickly, just talk a little bit about the literature on the importance of outdoor access. So there's a growing body of this literature that there are physical, emotional, and cultural benefits to being outside. Now, these studies have occurred all over the world. There was a recent paper that did come out that these papers are largely only speaking to the physical, emotional, and cultural benefits for white and middle and upper class people. So it is important, I think, to mention that many of those studies are not focusing on all people. However, there are still these marked physical, emotional, cultural benefits. And if you have been outside, I'm sure that you can point to some of those, whether you camp or hike or walk or canoe. People like to go outside. There are many benefits to being out there, and it's different for every person. At the same time, there is another growing literature that speaks to the unequal access to the outdoors. This image is from just a campground in Brainerd, Minnesota. And I added it because it's, we have two signs, no tent camping and a camping permit required. One of the biggest and most commonly cited reasons for not going outside is money. It costs money to go outdoors. Some things are free, but many things aren't. Money, transportation to the outdoors, knowledge of outdoor activities are all sort of physical barriers. And it's very important to acknowledge that there are many racial and class systemic injustices that persist in outdoor access, whether that's historical trauma in communities of color with the outdoors or experiences with the outdoors, whether that's housing access and historical housing practices, which have led to fewer green spaces in Black and Brown communities in urban areas versus their white counterparts, or the fear of being outdoors for the fear of being prosecuted for not belonging. There is a lower representation of people of color in the outdoors. There are acts of violence on people of color in the outdoors that are well documented historically and continue to today. If you're familiar with the incident that happened just last year in Central Park, where a Black man who was birding had a woman call the police on him because she felt threatened while he was simply looking at birds in the parking lot of this park. These are real issues, and there is unequal access to the outdoors. And then last but not least, there are unique challenges for foreign-born individuals. I added this sign. This is a very common sign in most parks in Minneapolis. You'll notice that this is all in English. There is no translations for folks. These signs use a lot of words that people may be unfamiliar with. And on top of language barriers, there are real knowledge barriers. People that are arriving in this country are often not told how to access the outdoors. They may be unfamiliar with activities that people do, like canoeing or snowshoeing or cross-country skiing. I'm giving specific examples in Minnesota. Or they just don't know where to go. Jessica will likely touch on this later, but in our pilot, we had people just not know where to experience the outdoors. They didn't know where they could rent a canoe. They didn't know where to camp. So these are all unique challenges. And I wanted to share two quick studies that are actually focused on Minneapolis. This study was conducted in 2017, and it surveyed people in, I think, 3 census tracts in the Twin Cities. These are primarily in the Minneapolis side of the Twin Cities. But they looked at a bunch of factors of barriers to access. And you can see down here, these are the results of a logistic regression, which is basically just a fancy name for a line, a slope on a line. And the numbers in bold mean that these are statistically significant. So, foreign-born individuals are 3.82 times more likely to not go outside because of language barriers They're 4.45 times more likely not to go outside because of cultural restrictions, and 1.86 times more likely to not go outside because of a lack of companions. And another study, this was conducted by the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board. They surveyed folks visiting parks and looked at similar questions. They asked about barriers. And so this was the question that they asked. And you'll notice that language barriers, cost of programs, lack of information about facilities, concern about public safety, and feeling of welcomeness all were very, very often cited as significant barriers for foreign-born folks to go outside. So these are real issues for this community. And it's important to acknowledge that these folks are not able or less likely to go outside and engage with the outdoors. So now I'm going to pass it over to Britt, and she's going to share a little bit about where this program sort of comes from. So Britt, I will pass it off.
Great. Yeah, a little bit of context for how this came to be and where it fits, which I think helps understand where it could go. So it is under the auspices of the Minnesota Master Naturalist program, which is a similar model to Master Gardeners as a volunteer sort of encouragement and support program. Participants to become a Master Naturalist will go through a 40-hour course on one of Minnesota's biomes. These are the 3 sort of habitat types that you see up there. So they've learned a background in natural history, and then they continue to volunteer for conservation-minded groups across the state. And so that could be delivering educational programs, that could be stewardship activities like removing invasive species or planting pollinator gardens. It could be participating in citizen science, so you're helping collect data on Minnesota's natural resources. So altogether, we have like 90,000-ish hours a year that people contribute. So they're really making a difference in Minnesota. But when we looked at some evaluation data in 2018, it was not shocking to us at all, but we were not reaching a very representative slice of Minnesotans. And so this map is where people live who are Master Naturalist volunteers. They're very predominantly white. It does tend to skew towards retirement or empty nest age in people who are able to give that time volunteering. And you can look at some of the other things there. But so our participants are pretty homogeneous. And then this is, yes, thank you, Lucas. So one way to look at equity would be that we would want to change the makeup of our volunteers, right? We would want to introduce more people of color. We want to have members from different communities. That's a thing, right? Everyone everywhere is trying to do that, but I think that it really ignores the fact that our program was created, and it benefits a certain group of people, right? So we could try to advertise differently to invite different people in, but if our model isn't something that works for them, it's not very fair to try to invite them into our space and again make them fit our mold. And so we were really thinking about what are ways that our volunteers can be doing some more equitable work? Can we leverage all of our resources? We have curriculum, we have these really talented volunteers who know things and who are doing service, who are excited about being outside and helping other people access nature. So how could we put this together in a place, again, that creates a mold or a place that is easier for particularly new language learners to come in? How can we extend the benefits that we all know and love to other people? Ta-da, and together, that is Nature for New Minnesotans. So looking at these barriers, are there things that we can remove? Certainly we can't tackle all of systemic racism, but within access to nature, what can we do? So can we increase their environmental literacy? Help them find ways to get to these places, and then encourage these conversations. So working with partners within the conservation field as well as English language learning communities, because it turns out we all have things to offer each other. So to address this, we wrote a grant to the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, sometimes known as LCCMR. So again, looking at ways that we can use our resources, our curriculum, to be working with new audiences. So these are our grant deliverables that we put together thinking about the possibilities, again, with the resources we have, but as well as partnering with organizations like the groups that you all are coming from. So as we wrote the grant, we asked a number of different people, how this might fit in their system. I had a lot of input from a friend who was the education director for an English learning center. And so again, figuring out, instead of just we're delivering a curriculum that we think you should love and you should use, what are ways that we can work together? So we know some things about nature. We have information on the Big Woods, Big Rivers area that includes the Twin Cities. How can this be adapted? And following advice from English learning groups that the advice is to make this accessible at a language of, or a level of English that is manageable, versus translate into all possible languages everywhere, and then just, again, plop that out and hope that people use it, love it. Again, looking at the barriers, what are things that we can remove, or we can at least teach people how to get around? And then share our knowledge so that it's not just the Minnesota Master Naturalist program knows a lot of things about outside, you have to come to us, but can we pass this on so that it becomes embedded in these ELL programs? And again, not hinging just on us. So these partners are mentioned in our grant. These are groups where I had contacts, was introduced to them, able to work with them for our pilot, which you'll hear about next, and for continuing programs through June 2024 will be the end of the grant, and then we'll kind of look at where things go from there. But yeah, maybe that's all I need to say there. No,
Sorry,
you're
Britt.
good, Lucas.
No, go ahead. You can say.
No, I was just gonna check my notes, but I don't think I actually have anything else.
Okay.
You were right to move on. But then recognizing too that again, we have lots of knowledge. We're not the only people who know things about Zide, who have things to offer. And so Lucas has been really great about networking with these other conservation-minded organizations who already have programs but maybe struggle to get the information about their programs out to the audience that they want, or maybe haven't even gotten that far and are just places that have the Bell Museum is a great place to visit, but you have to know that it exists, right? You have to know how to get there, you have to know how to pay for it, etc., or to access their other scholarship programs. And so being the connector so that audiences can find these resources and participate in these programs.
Awesome. Thank you, Britt. I think now we'll turn it over to Jessica. And Jessica's going to share a little bit about our pilot program. Before she starts, I'll just give a little bit more insight into the rundown of this past year. The grant began in June of 2021. Yes, June of 2021. And so for that first fall of 2021, I worked with ELL teachers and ELL partner organizations that were identified in the grant to write a 12-lesson pilot curriculum. I worked with an English language learning curriculum developer, and together we put together 12 lessons. So now I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Great, thanks. Okay, so I'll just start with the big picture, which is that this has been an amazing experience to be a part of. In addition to a lot of really fun inquiry-based science lessons that were highly engaging. I mean, the class was ready to just keep going with this theme they probably could have kept it going for months. We've also had 4 really awesome field trips. We've been to the Bell Museum. We learned about Dakota land history at the Bruce Bento Nature Sanctuary at Wakantipi. And we went canoeing on Phelan Lake and helped clean up trash in the lake. And then most recently, we just got back from a camping trip to Itasca State Park. So with that said, where this all started was Lucas came into my classroom last fall, and we started really with some things of what were students most interested in learning. So we did a little bit of surveying, some discussions in order to find out what was going to be of greatest interest to them about nature in Minnesota. And then in the spring, in February, we started about 6 weeks of where we focused primarily on this in the classroom. The class is a intermediate and advanced ESL class in St. Paul. And most of our lessons revolved around a model of observation. We might watch a video, look at some specimens, look at pictures, write and talk about observations. And then inquiry or questions. So we did a lot of question writing. We had students refine their questions for clarity and work with each other to think about what questions were most important or how they could make their question more specific. We did readings and activities. And then often we would return to those lists of questions. You can see one of them on the left side of the slide there. And we would ask, have we learned the answers to any of these questions? Do we have new questions we want to ask? If we haven't answered these yet, where could we go to find the answers? So that really student-driven way of teaching, I think, was so powerful for all of us. Because as somebody pointed out in the chat, the participants in the program have a lot of natural environmental knowledge, right? But it's not always knowledge about Minnesota. So some of it was making connections, parallels between other places people have lived and the environment in Minnesota. Some of it was learning how to apply some of that more technical science language to the things that they already knew about the natural environment. And then there were just a lot of things they shared with us that I had no idea about. I learned a lot more about how you propagate banana trees than I thought I would ever learn. So during that time, we talked about who is a naturalist. We did lessons on season, weather, and climate. We learned about animal adaptations for Minnesota's climate, especially winter. And then based on the students' interest primarily, we started to dabble into artificial selection and natural selection and how many of these adaptations came about. All right, we can go on. There we go. Okay, so the beauty of this partnership for me as a teacher is that I love teaching science content, but I am not a science educator. That is not my background. And so when I want to teach a lesson that has a lot of science concepts, it is a lot of preparation work for me because I feel like I have to fact check everything. I have to make sure that I know, for example, how to pronounce the technical terms in the readings, or I need to make sure that I'm pretty sure I know why the days are longer in summer, but can I really explain it? Maybe I need to do a little research on my own. That level of extra time means that I don't include those things as often as I would like to, because I don't always have that time. So the partnership with a naturalist and with this sort of expert curriculum offered me the opportunity to bring this content into the classroom, but focus on the things that I know how to do best, which is providing more opportunities for language practice, doing more with the vocabulary so that it really becomes part of, so that everybody becomes really comfortable working with some of those more technical science terms. And as we did that, I think we kind of ended up with these two roles. If somebody wants to click on the slide there, thanks. Okay, so you can see that I talked a little bit about that expertise. And then Lucas also came into the classroom with a lot of ideas. Here's an activity we could do to demonstrate that. Or here's another activity we could do to demonstrate that. And then also the facilitation for these field trips, because field trips also, like, not only are they money, but they are a lot of work to organize. And having someone help you kind of shortcut the process a little bit, like get right in, know what's available, know how to, how far in advance you need to plan. It really was a great help. And then I took the content that was coming into the classroom and said, okay, now how do we use this to practice grammar, to practice writing, to practice conversation and speaking and vocabulary? All right. And so one of the lessons that we're going to share today is a lesson on axial tilt to help learners understand seasons. And it was very interesting because we had a pretty overwhelming number of participants who had grown up in places near the equator. And so they were really interested and really surprised to learn some of these differences as you get further away from the equator, and also why. So we started this lesson with pre-work on vocabulary, some of the things they would need to know in order to be able to talk about and read about, things like axis, tilt, orbit. And we did that with a lot of hands-on manipulatives like the globe that Betsy's holding, and photos to elicit observations about seasons and climate in different parts of the world. And then we did a demonstration that was part of the curriculum using flashlights and globes to simulate different times of the year in different parts of the world. And then the class had differentiated projects to help practice and show what they had learned. Betsy, who's one of the more advanced students in the class, at this point was giving a presentation. She had been asked to give a presentation on part of the content that we had learned. Other students worked on being able to describe a couple of terms, or being able to, hear a term and demonstrate it using the globe. Do you want to add anything to that, Lucas?
Yeah, I'm gonna actually, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen briefly, or stop sharing the presentation briefly, and pull up the what the lesson plan sort of looks like. I don't know if can everybody see a different thing on the screen?
Not yet, Lucas.
Not yet. Okay, let me stop my share. I'll do the correct way. Here we go. So this is something that I will be sharing with folks after to get a sort of a sense of what these lessons look like. But these lessons are built into modules that cover, a wide variety of ideas that are, all connected. And one of the big things that we are working on with this project is to create lessons that are sequential. But if teachers are not interested in doing everything in sequence, or if they have a limited amount of time, that they'd rather only do 1 or 2 lessons, we're trying to set them up in that way. So this is lesson 2 of a larger module on seasons and biomes of Minnesota. And so in each of these lessons, you'll see an overview with some big questions that you can answer with your class, and some objectives. And then what we do is provide a teacher background, and this teacher background shares the science, if you will. This is designed for teachers to read prior to the lesson so that they feel confident teaching the subject. We give some background on what students should know beforehand. And if they don't know, we provide some supplemental lessons. And so, yeah, you can see we have some supplemental lessons that I'll show in a moment. And then we have some pretty standard lesson plan. We have some review from a previous lesson, a warm-up activity with some supports for learners, as well as our vocabulary. And then we walk through the lesson. So here's our axial tilt demonstration that Jessica was describing, with the relevant vocabulary attached. And then we will have extensions provided for perhaps more advanced ELL learners. And then a supplemental lesson. And this was actually suggested by Jessica during the pilot, that oftentimes there is, and as we learned at the very beginning of this presentation, there's lots of sort of background knowledge that often goes into learning about science, whether that's math or reading, English, grammar. So we try our best to identify those things for ELL teachers so that they're prepared when students start to ask questions about the lesson. And so that is sort of a sample of what the curriculum is starting to become or look like from a teacher standpoint. Yeah, but that is, all I wanted to share that. And I'll go back to our presentation. Let's see. There it is. All right. Okay, back to you, Jessica.
So this is the picture from our afternoon of paddling at Lake Phelan. It was the first time paddling for all of these participants. You know, even though some of them do enjoy other activities outdoors, like fishing, even. And on this trip, we also opened it up to families. So we had a lot of kids with us. And let's see, I'm going to read this just because it's a great quote. It's a little hard to read here. The student equated the journey of the Mississippi River from a mere stream to a massive river to their own journey as a refugee. The journey in their mind was a beautiful thing that overcomes obstacles, and wanted me to know that it would make them incredibly happy to see this. And this is in reference to our one of the first lessons we did, which was about the headwaters of the Mississippi River. And full circle was that we got to go to Lake Itasca recently and see the headwaters of the Mississippi. And it was really an emotional experience for everybody. And we had 6 participants who went on that camping trip. And I knew that it was the first time, you know, camping for all of them, but I was surprised that for 4 out of the 6, it was also their first time outside of the Twin Cities, even though some of them have lived here 7 years or more. So I think that also speaks to, we're lucky to have lots of natural resources right within the cities, but I think people living, people don't have equal access to travel opportunities, right? And opportunities to get away from your home base. Let's go ahead to the next one. Yeah, so these are some of the things, some of the really fun observations and stories we were hearing from people during the classroom pilot. So a student reported that she had shared what she was learning with her 14-year-old niece. That was, I think, about how the axial tilt and seasons, and that she felt really proud that she could explain something about science to this 14-year-old. And a different student, we had this, as we had been talking about seasons and the equator, and then we've been talking about adaptations, animal adaptations. Somebody asked the question, well, why do humans have different skin tones? And it was just like this great segue, because we had, at that point, all the background knowledge we needed to be able to pull up a map that showed pigmentation variations and how that matched the temperature on the map. And then students were able to draw their own conclusion right away that you know, more sun throughout the year leads to adaptations of darker skin pigmentation. And I think that's a great example of how this kind of learning goes beyond, you know, preparation for a GED science test. It goes beyond just sort of getting people out into, you know, these sort of idealistic ideas that some people have about getting out into nature, right? That this is social justice at its core. So that was a really cool outcome. Yeah. And then this quote was from our visit to Wakantipi, which for people who don't know is a sacred indigenous site in St. Paul along the cliffs of the Mississippi River. And after we went up to a different park and had a picnic, and one of the students said, "Look at us, we're people from all over the world, eating food from around the world on Dakota land. And did you ever think this would happen in your life?" So again, there was a real, the trip to Wakantipi was eye-opening in many ways that weren't all about the natural environment. They also had a lot to do with the history of the people of St. Paul, so, and of Minnesota. All right, we are getting right down to it. Just a few more pictures there. Bell Museum, the headwaters you might recognize.
Awesome. Yes, I can't believe it. We're almost on time. This is great. So I just wanted to share a little bit about next steps for this project, and then we should have some time for questions. So as we move into the fall of 2022, we are in the process of expanding out from Literacy Minnesota into some of our other partner organizations. Actually, at this very moment, some of the folks at the English Language Center from Our Saviors in Minneapolis are fishing at Powderhorn Park, and I'm going to jump back over there right after this is done. So we're going to be building towards having this available for more English language learning classrooms. And we are going to continue to develop content that is place-based and experiential-based and grounded in the ecology of Minnesota. We're also going to continue to develop partnerships with our local stakeholders who have access to the outdoor opportunities. So these include the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge, who we're fishing with today, and who we went canoeing with on Phelan Lake. It includes the Minnesota DNR, who helped facilitate our camping trip this past weekend to Itasca. It includes the Bell Museum, who's been a really awesome partner and actually provided free memberships to all the students that went with us on our Bell Museum trip. So they've been awesome as a partner. It includes the Lower Phelan Creek Project, which runs and is actually building a nature center at Bruce Vento Sanctuary, where Wakantipi is. And it includes some, we're continuing to develop those partnerships to get people outside that are connected to the natural history of Minnesota. We're also working on creating those avenues of contact. And then lastly, we are really looking to establish a network of ELL community members, outdoor partners, and statewide organizations to promote this program. Next summer, we hope to host a workshop where we invite ELL educators, students, and our outdoor partners together to talk about how do we provide better ecology-based programming to English language learners. We're already having those conversations with our stakeholders. Many DNR programs are not designed to work with English language learners, and so we're talking to them about how they can do a better job, as just one example. And then we're also looking to identify additional ELL community-based organizations or educators that are interested in partnership. All of the content that we're developing is going to be available to the public at the conclusion of this grant in 2024, but we are looking for people that are interested in sort of troubleshooting and being a part of that collaborative process of building up to that final product. And so those are sort of the two things. And I do want to quickly just acknowledge our funding for this project. This grant is through the Clean Water, Land and Legacy Amendment, and then the Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund, the ENRTF, also known as the LCCMR. So, yes, we do it. We have time for some questions. I would love to, any questions are good. We'd love to hear them and answer them.